Chicago went into this season saying, just wait until we're fully formed. Just wait until we hit the scene. They win decisively on the road. Chicago looked like the reigning champions.
There's no reason we can't do it again.
We were on the road, right? We're a team that plays really well on the road. We have to create our own energy. We got to do it from the jump of the game.
Hayden Austin Knapp elevates for the score.
What can he do? Jeremy Langdon again in the end zone.
Perfect execution from Chicago. Let's go!
Welcome back. It's Swing Pass. I'm Adam Ruffner, and I'm joined, as always, by Evan Lepler. We are recording on Thursday, May 29th, between weeks 5 and 6. We last left off talking about last Friday's slate of one-goal finishes. Saturday followed with some pretty interesting action, but I think the headline emerging from week 5 and really carrying over into this coming weekend's games is the Atlanta Hustle look like the best freaking team in this league right now. They're 6-0. They just punished San Diego in the second half, a pretty good Growlers team, and now they're going to be taking their talents on the road in this interdivisional kind of dreams showcase scenario at Minnesota on Friday night for the free Friday Frisbee feature, and then on Saturday night at Chicago to face the 1-0 Union in the game of the week. I mean, Evan, we're just past Memorial Day, and it feels like we're really getting into the meat of the schedule here. I know we've kind of been picking up a little bit on that thread as we've worked into the season, but, you know, we start with these Atlanta matchups, and then beyond that, there's just so many important games on the Week 6 slate.
Yeah, it's going to be a really great weekend. There's so much interesting action with ramifications that'll ripple in the weeks going forward. We got 6 Friday games and then some really good Saturday games, including the game of the week, Atlanta, Chicago. And then there's 2 Sunday afternoon games that are staggered at 2 Eastern and 4 Eastern that both have intrigue and are going to be must wins for multiple of the teams that are playing. Where arguably everybody that's playing on Sunday is going to be in something of a must win situation. But you start with Atlanta, and that's the right place to start. We've seen them play brilliant offense, and we've seen them come through in the clutch. Now it's time to see if they can play messy, sloppy, Midwestern ultimate. And that's what we got this weekend, because the Wind Chill are going to do everything they can to try to muck up the game. The weather looks really nice. I'm sure Minnesota's hoping there's some wind. And Chicago, it's usually pretty windy there as well. It's just going to be a really interesting weekend. Fact of the matter is, for this Atlanta team, basically every weekend they take the field feels like kind of a must-watch weekend. One, because they're really good. I pointed out in my belated Tuesday toss this week, of the 5 single-digit turnover performances in the league so far this year, Atlanta's got 3 of them, which is ridiculous. Wow. I'd be surprised if there were single-digit turns at Minnesota, at Chicago. Usually they're more double-digit turnover games in those venues, but we'll see if Atlanta can do it. But, Atlanta has already played 6 games. You're right, we're getting into the guts of the season. We're also at that point where Atlanta's going to be playing its 8th game on Saturday as Chicago plays its 2nd, which is just bizarre and strange. And, who is this Union team? It's still kind of hard to tell. And, they need to prove themselves a lot going forward, even though they got an impressive first win at the reigning champion Minnesota. But for Atlanta, after this weekend, it doesn't slow down. They got to go to Carolina in another game of the week next weekend. And then, they get a couple weeks off. They have a home game against Houston. And then they finish their season home for Austin, who's currently undefeated right now. And then another game at Carolina. So just we foresaw this in the preseason, that Atlanta's schedule was the most interesting, the most kind of diabolically tricky. And so far, they have passed every single test. And the narrative could change this weekend, Adam. They could lose both these games and be 6-2 and be a couple games behind the Austin Soul in the loss column heading into June. I certainly expect them to get at least a split, but it wouldn't be stunning if Minnesota finally upped its game and got a marquee win. And then the Hustle are likely not going to have Brett Holzmeyer on Saturday in Chicago. They got a lot of other good players, but Holzmeier is their bona fide MVP candidate. So, yeah, there's going to be a lot to digest after this weekend, and I'm really excited to be at TCO Stadium on Friday night. Championship weekend caliber venue. You're really a place that the Wind Chill have never won. And I know
Yeah.
Ben Feldman is kind of desperate to get that monkey off their back. And look, Minnesota needs a marquee win. Like we can talk about Atlanta. Minnesota has looked absolutely dominant in their 2 wins and then looked like a team that barely knew how to throw and catch a Frisbee in their 1 loss to Chicago. So, will the real Minnesota Wind Chill please stand up at home? And can they be competitive for 4 full quarters? We saw them be competitive with New York at home last year for a couple of quarters, and then it unraveled. They obviously had a miserable start against Chicago, almost didn't score in the first quarter. We know Atlanta's good. I'm almost more interested to see how Minnesota fares against Atlanta, because if the Wind Chill don't look competitive, that's going to be a real indictment on them going forward.
Yeah, and it does feel like Minnesota is very much a bull or bear team in this interdivisional format. Either they come out and they just sort of punch back and forth against some really good competition, or they can lay down. A couple years ago against Colorado, went out into the Rockies and got absolutely drubbed by the Summit. Last year at home in TCO against the Empire, this Minnesota team, I think you're right, needs some accreditation. I did like the do-si-do you did, though, where you kind of jumped ahead, forecasted Atlanta maybe possibly losing 1 or both games this coming weekend, and then walked back onto Minnesota's criticisms and how they need to kind of show themselves in these premier matchups. I appreciate the both sides in there. It felt like good amount of shading for both squads. But, let's talk about this Hustle team for a second. I think, their strength obviously is this offense. You keyed in on Holzmeier, who is an MVP favorite coming into the season. I think right now you could absolutely make a case for him being that kind of at the midway point, especially given that they've already played 6 games this year. But it really is kind of like a quartet, an engine that's been driving that offense to a league high success rate. And it goes well beyond Holzmeier. We've talked about it on the show. It's Hayden Austin-Knabb really kind of peaking and hitting the kind of ceiling I think we've all been forecasting him for the past few years. Austin Taylor playing, I'll say it, the best ultimate of his illustrious career. A franchise cornerstone, somebody that's made all UFA squads in the past, is perennially one of the top throwers, just playing at a different level this season, right? He's in rhythm with Miller in the lineup on offense. It gives Taylor a little bit more freedom to work from an upfield set and kind of mobilize himself, not just stay in the backfield and receive resets, but he can take off downfield and become a receiver if he needs to. That version of Draco is just so dangerous, and it makes, I think, the Hustle attack so much more multivalent. They can come at you at so many more different ways when they have Draco kind of operating like that. And then I just mentioned him a moment ago, but Adam Miller, we've talked about it on the show. We've talked about it off air. I think as far as an impact addition to a lineup, he's been the most valuable switchover, free agent signing, whatever, in 2025. I mean, this Hustle team came into this year with all the expectations in the world, and they've met and exceeded pretty much every single one. And we can talk all day and night about kind of the known quantities that have been with this Hustle team over the past couple of years. But this switchover from defense to offense, with Miller becoming this, gunslinger for the Hustle O. I mean, it's just, you can just see it, right? We could talk about the stats. We could talk about the performances. This is the best team in the league right now. And it's because it's been optimized by Miller time on offense. This just kind of, the chemistry with Hayden Austin-Knabb, the ability to kind of strike from anywhere as a thrower. He just opens up everything.
I agree. I mean, I just realized this looking at it now. Did you recognize, Adam, that Austin Taylor currently number 1 in the league in assists, and then you got Miller, Holzmeier, and Austin-Knabb all among the top 10 with Taylor in assists? I know they've played more games than anybody, and
I was
that's a
gonna say
factor.
that's a big part of it.
Yeah, but like that quartet that you mentioned, and they've got such good, solid glue guy, like better than glue guys around them, like veterans like Knoll and Brock and Wilson Holiday and Eckwurzel and Olson, like just dudes that you can trust and that you can count on that could win their matchup. Any one of those guys that I just mentioned could go off for 8 goals in a game, but they're also fine, having 12 completions and no turnovers and 2 goals and 1 assist and kind of letting those big dudes steer the ship. Um, you said like Adam Miller was like the most impactful guy that switched lines or signed as a free agent. Like those are two different things, and I can't think of a better guy who's been more impactful that switched lines. It'd be an interesting debate, like if we're talking best addition to an O line this year, like Adam
So
Miller or Calvin Brown or
I wanted to expand my definition to include free agents because I think that's how good Miller has been. Whether it's, playing in a new role offensively or defensively, or just stepping onto a new team entirely. I think regardless of kind of how you define the generalized category, Miller has been the most impactful new addition in 2025, period. That's the conclusion I want to arrive at, just because again, he opens up everything on this offense and makes it into the kind of caliber machine that is deserving of this hustle team. It's sort of like the glass ceiling that we've seen it bumping into the past couple of years. It's punched through, and I think it's as much about the playmaking as kind of the melody of the tune. Like Miller's sense of moment, his ability to know when to kind of play it safe versus driving hammers over the top to the cross side of the field. It just it it's the thing that was missing from Atlanta, right? Like we've seen it in the playoffs the past couple of years where they're so good, they're making plays for a quarter or two, and then everything just starts to slowly come apart. This year they've ran into similar points of trepidation, and it feels like at all those moments it's Miller coming through, slicing a throw through defensive coverage, and them just unjamming from what could have potentially in the past been the point in which their offense comes apart. Like, I don't know. He's different out there for them.
Yeah, he fits. He fits with what they're doing. He fits better with Austin Taylor than I would have expected.
Yes.
And he's upped his decision making in a significant way. Like to be an O-line handler in this league for a top team, ideally you want to be around 95% completion rate, and that's exactly where he is. He was in between 93 and 94% in the past. You may say like, well, that's just one, completion or one drop, and like that's true, but so far so good. Everything is just kind of working for that Atlanta offense. And look, their defense isn't bad either. And that may be an even bigger story, how the defense has continued to churn without Adam Miller quarterbacking. And that's a tribute to, Lucas McClamrock and Dean Ramsey and Tyler Randall and Coleman Tapero. And, it feels like at times we haven't even seen the whole kind of Atlanta D-line together because Michael Fairley has only played sparingly and they've had a couple other guys miss some games, but they've been a plug-and-play team, and whoever has gotten opportunities has looked good doing it. So, yeah, I'm curious to see how they fare in uglier ultimate, which is what I would expect this weekend. Now, who knows? Maybe it'll be like totally win-free, and they'll have their best offensive game of the season and have 6 turnovers and win comfortably on Friday night against Minnesota. But look, Minnesota's going to do some things. I don't know what. I'm talking to Ben Feldman later today and try to get some secrets out of him to be able to prepare for the broadcast. But, Minnesota has a way of messing things up for other teams' offenses. Now, not always, obviously, but the strength of Minnesota, for sure, is their defense. They got a guy in Justin Burnett who obviously you'd think would be exceptionally motivated to play well and make some things happen against the hustle, his old team.
Yeah.
And Yeah, I mean, this whole Minnesota team feels like they have something to prove. They should be pretty close to full strength, uh, coming off of college nationals. And like Noah Hansen. I was talking to him pregame because he was coaching the Carleton men on Monday. I said, "Am I going to see you in 4 days at TCO Stadium?" He said, "Yep, I'll be there." Really fired up for it. So yeah, Minnesota's going to be ready, and I feel like win or lose, Atlanta has shown who they are. Um, from an educational standpoint, we're going to learn more about Minnesota this weekend and whether they look like a premier contender in 2025. Because so far they've done what they've been supposed to do in their games against lesser teams, even on the road. I mean, Adam, I don't know if you watched the Minnesota Pittsburgh game. I did not.
Oh
I
yeah.
was working at college. I was working at college nationals, and I'm like, all of a sudden it becomes 5 o'clock on the West Coast, and you're like, damn, their final scores. And I pull up the app and I see 31-14. And I mean, I said in the Tuesday toss, it was a wow. It was also a holy bleep. Like, what? 31-14? Like, that's a 2015 UFA score. We don't usually see scores like that, especially
You
against
ever
a
see
team
those
like
videos?
Pittsburgh at home.
You ever see those videos where it's like pneumatic press versus a ceiling fan or whatever, and it's just a giant metal press, like absolutely obliterating an object with immutable force? That's kind of
No,
what happened with the
I
Minnesota.
haven't watched those videos.
Okay, okay, well, very popular YouTube kind of variety. Anyways, the Minnesota defense just found the pressure point in the Thunderbirds offense and just relentlessly, I should say, attacked it over and over and over again. Which brings me to a larger point, which is just that this matchup coming up between Minnesota and Atlanta is a great kind of unstoppable force with Atlanta's offense versus an immovable object with the wind chill defense. Wind chill lead the league in break rate. They're our second in break rate behind the Union. Atlanta is number one in offensive success rate. I think this is going to be a great test as to kind of the larger meta analysis as to whether offense or defense wins, right? Whether Minnesota can strategize enough coverages to finally figure out how to put a cap on this hustle attack, or if Atlanta is just going to continue to do what they've done all season and find solutions to virtually any situation and any sort of defensive scheme that they approach.
Yeah, I mean, and also like I mean, we've always had to slightly discount Central Division stats because there have been a couple games against bad Detroit teams through the years. And I'm not equating Indy or Minnesota or Pittsburgh with Detroit, but I go to look at Minnesota's offensive numbers and like they're middle of the pack. Their hold rate is in the top half of the league. And yet, I'm curious to see how they look against an elite defense because when they played against Chicago in windy conditions a couple weeks ago, it was disgusting, and not using that verb adjective in the positive way. So yeah, I'm curious to see if Will Brandt and Josh Klain and Gordon Larson can put together some solid, consistent possessions and keep the disc moving
I worry
and
about it.
make
I
some
worry about
plays.
it against this hustle defense. You talk about some of the best mid lane defenders, Lucas McClamrock, Tyler Rando. Those guys are dogs on the hunt right now. And I think Minnesota likes to operate a lot from that kind of in out look where they kind of get the disc upfield in the middle part and then kind of look for continuations on the outer rails from like Larson or Vanuka. That is an area of the field that Atlanta's defense has a lot of talent in. And man, McClamrock, since he's come back from injury, he looks exactly like the D Pody front runner he was last year. I mean, he's just making it happen everywhere in the field. Did you see that self Matt Callahan he had this
Yeah,
last weekend against the
it was
Growlers
great.
where he got
It
a
was great.
read from like 15 yards away, macked it straight into the end zone, caught it for the goal. Like, he's just firing on all cylinders. Dean Ramsey is putting hats on everyone in the end zone in transition too. I mean, he is an outright danger in deep space on the counter. I just Yeah, I think the Minnesota offense has a lot to prove against an Atlanta defense that seems to get better each and every week.
Yeah, I'm looking at Minnesota's roster. A guy like Paul Krennic could take a big step forward in a game like this,
He could. We've kind of been
making
waiting.
plays. Yeah, Quinn Snyder as well. These are the guys that Minnesota needs to lean on to be competitive with a top team like Atlanta. And Minnesota's going to be 2-2 if they don't lose this game. Obviously, I still think they're pretty comfortably in the playoff mix in the Central Division. But I remember when Madison was kind of winning the Central Midwest Division every year, through 2014 to 2018. And I remember doing an open for a game when we fully expected Madison to win at Breese Stevens Field, where they hadn't lost to a divisional opponent in 5 years, literally. And we're like, not only does Madison need to win, they need to look good doing it. And they're not measuring themselves against this team. They're measuring themselves against the teams that they're going to play against championship weekend. And that's kind of how I feel about Minnesota. Now, Minnesota doesn't need to win this game, but they need to look good losing, if that makes sense. Obviously, winning would be great, but if they lose 21-19 in a competitive game, that tells me something that they can compete. If they get blown out and lose it 20-12, that's a really different story.
I totally disagree with you this year. I think maybe in past years you could rate teams according to a good loss or something, but I think that the way in which these standings are currently scattering out, you just can't afford to lose anything right now, especially later on for potential seeding. I mean, if Minnesota just kind of quietly blows having any sort of home game in the playoffs, that's a big deal for the reigning champs, right? Like, Winchell have historically struggled going on the road and winning tough games in the past. That's not going to be an easy test at Madison potentially or at Chicago this year. And so I don't know anymore if these sort of they played well, but they still lost, performances matter much in 2025. I've been thinking the same thing all week about the Growlers, right? Like, they've looked really impressive this year. They still have 2 losses and lost the season series against a Hustle team that is now 6-0 and dominates them in the divisional standings. Every single game, every single week matters, and you can't really just chalk up these sort of moral victories, I think, anymore. If Minnesota's 2-2 after this weekend and their only wins to show for it are Pittsburgh and Indy, that's trouble to me. I think that invites in the skepticism that a lot of their skeptics had after their championship last year, which was, they got the benefit of the wind. The other teams played down. If they're sort of coasting into June with wins against the lowest teams in their own division, like you're saying, like Minnesota's got to show something in week 6.
I hear you. I look at it practically and after what they've done at Pittsburgh and at Indy, there's no way Minnesota is not going to make the playoffs in the Central Division. That is a done deal. Atlanta is more in danger of missing the playoffs in the South than Minnesota is in the Central. Now, I'm not projecting Atlanta to miss the playoffs, obviously, but Minnesota is locked into a playoff spot, at worst the 3 spot, and I expect him to be number 2 or number 1. We'll see what happens this weekend. But my general point is that I'll make one last time and move on. I think Minnesota can earn respect this weekend even in defeat, because I think Atlanta's that good.
Well, what's respect worth?
Is the narrative of the season? I mean, look, Minnesota didn't earn a lot of respect against New York last year, and they still won the championship. So,
but I guess that's kind of muddying the waters a bit. But anyways, we should probably move on from the point.
Yeah, the Friday night this weekend, Adam, is nuts.
Yeah.
Now you're going to be broadcasting Indy Madison at Breeze, while DC is at Toronto, and then later in the evening Oakland's at Colorado, And then even later in the evening, Salt Lake is at Seattle. I think we should start with the earliest game, which is DC-Toronto at 7 o'clock Eastern. DC has 2 games this weekend. So does Toronto. Toronto plays DC on Friday, New York on Sunday, whereas DC has the Friday, Saturday at Toronto and at Montreal. It's kind of do or die time for the Rush, right? Like Mark Lloyd, they're finally getting this guy on the field. Is he going to be any resemblance of the player that he was during his heyday 7, 8 years ago? Time will tell. Like, he says he still has been training and is in great shape, but he's also in his mid-30s now, and I'll believe it when I see it. We've seen guys look a little bit older, and that changes their game dramatically. But for a Toronto team that had so much preseason hype, and I don't want to say has fallen flat because they've been fun to watch and they've been impressive for sequences, but you also are what your record is, as Bill Parcells like to say, and they are 0-3, and they've got a good DC team who also is in a pretty important situation for them as they arrive at 2-2. Currently, tied for third place with New York at the 500 mark, as they near the midway point of their season. So, what do you think is important in DC Toronto, and what do you expect?
I mean, look, Toronto sits at 0-3. As you say, they've shown some potential in stretches, particularly on the offensive side of the disc. They've got tons of playmakers on this Toronto roster in 2025, even before the addition of Mark Lloyd here in the mid part of the season. But they've just got to show a pulse on defense. I mean, they're second to last in break rate right now. And if you watch the film, there's really no attention to detail when it comes to the Rush and defensive play. There's a lot of one-on-one coverage. There's a lot of kind of an expectation to get a layout block as a form of producing a turnover. And beyond that, it's kind of allowing opposing offenses to have their way with the field. And I just worry about that against a DC team that, while they've been kind of hit or miss on the offensive side of the disc so far this season, they could really catch fire against a so far unmotivated Rush D-line. But that being said, this Toronto offense is kind of quietly playing so well that if the Rush defense even gets back to, say, mediocrity, they can make a pretty big run in the East. And we've been hearing this for weeks. I mean, you've been reporting on it in your coverages and the tosses, where teams that have gone up against Toronto so far have been not so quietly saying, hey, we don't want to face this team later on. They have a lot of horses that can run, and we've seen that. The international talent, Karklands, Blasman, I'm forgetting on the
Abelteens.
Thank you. The re-added Rush players as well, Mike McKenzie, Ty Barbieri, these players have been playing really good. Martin Gallant, when he's been available, he's looked downright freakish at times.
No Luke Camire for the Rush this weekend. He was downgraded from questionable to out. So that's not an insignificant loss, as he, has 115 completions in 3 games at a 95% clip. That's a big piece of their offense that's unavailable. Now they do add Mark Lloyd, who can be a big piece of an offense too. And also no Christian Boxley for DC as well.
Don't you kind of figure Lloyd to do his platooner role, his free safety role on defense? Kind of how he was almost the championship weekend MVP in 2017, virtually the last time we saw him play. I would be kind of surprised to see him on an offense, especially given how fast the Rush offense likes to play. But I could be wrong.
No, I think you're right. I think that is most likely, and with him crossing over after breaks, and the Rush can rely. I mean, their foreign guys are capable of taking a lot of touches, and using James Lewis and Mike McKenzie as downfield targets. This
Lewis
DC team,
great. By the way,
I mean,
James Lewis continues to add to his game after a year or two away, and he's got some nice throws.
Remember the last time we saw this DC team, they pulled a wind chill, only scoring 11 goals at home and losing.
Is that what we're calling it now?
Yeah, 11 goals at home is a wind chill.
You win a title and you get that as your epitaph? Ouch.
I have recency bias. I'm not afraid to admit it, but I don't forget. I just, that was what happened recently. Yeah, the Breeze, other than Boxley, have most of their guys that you would expect this weekend. I expect the conditions of the game to be a factor. Obviously, the Breeze have looked very, very good when it's still and have looked less good when it's windy offensively this year. Um, at some point, Adam, sometime down the road, we're gonna have like official stats for like DC's O line efficiency when the wind is less than 4 miles an hour versus when the wind, like we don't have that right now. But just anecdotally from the eye test, that is a significant factor for DC's O line. And look, traveling from DC to Toronto is not an easy trip. That just making that trip creates fatigue, and Toronto with Lloyd and his leadership, I I think I'm leaning Toronto in this game, and that's just kind of coming to me right now. But
Hey,
I
I
think
mean,
this Toronto team has put too much into it to just go quietly
The
at 0
Rush
and 4.
lost by 1 goal in their first meeting against DC this year, and they lost virtually every kind of 50-50 end of quarter, seesaw situational play in that game. And they just barely dropped that. It does kind of feel like this could be Toronto's game to take. Now, that would put DC at 2-3.
Hmm.
And they would then have to go on the road the following day and face a Montreal team that is playing up right now and has the kind of confidence to just start taking swings at anyone in this East Division. I, you know, Again, you say it's a must win for the Rush at 0-3. I don't disagree with you, but this is one of those matchups where it could really go either way, because if DC falls to 2-3 and then has to go on the road to Claude Robillard Stadium and face the resurgent Royale right now, uh, I think it's a big
Yeah.
weekend for Jacques Nissen. I've just been so impressed with him this year. I think, you kind of touched on him coming into this year as being maybe a kind of dark horse potential MVP player. I think if DC either splits or comes out 2-0 this weekend, we'll be talking a lot more about that heading into week 7, because he's just been lights out. I know the offense has struggled to produce points, but that's not because of the play of number 2-4.
I do think it speaks to the difference just in the East Division and in the league overall. Like, I just pulled up DC's history. 2021 and 2022 and 2024, 3 of the last 4 years, they went 10-2. The one year that they didn't go 10-2, they went 9-3. And we're talking about how it's realistic that they could fall to 2-3 or 2-4 even. I mean, I think they'll get one game, but I wouldn't be stunned if, like the Empire a couple of weeks ago when they went to Boston and Montreal, they lost two really tight games. Like, would it be crazy to imagine Toronto losing two consecutive or DC losing two straight overtime games? Like, I could see that happening because I expect them to be close, but I also think the home teams have an edge, and it just speaks to how the landscape of the league, and particularly the East Division, has changed. And yeah, I mean, the East is just such a gauntlet. It's really so much fun.
We haven't said this just point blank period. The three teams with the longest playoff tenure in our league right now, the New York Empire, the DC Breeze, and the Carolina Flyers, are all in jeopardy of not making the playoffs in 2025. You got 3-3 New York, 2-2 DC, and 0-4 Carolina. I mean, we
Mm,
just have completely overturned the established power in this league in a matter of 5 weeks? What have we got in the next 3 alone? What have we got
yeah,
going into this weekend? I mean, let's continue to go through some of these matchups. We've only touched on the 2 on Friday night between Atlanta and Minnesota and DC and
yeah.
Toronto. Let's
We
continue
got
to
to
move
go
on.
West Division
No,
Friday night.
I want to circle this 5-0 Oakland at 2-2 Colorado matchup. You got Colorado injecting a whole bunch of recently gold medal college champions into their
Sorry,
lineup.
silver medal.
Silver
Medal.
medal. I apologize. I
Ouch. Twisting the
apologize.
knife.
I know. I'm sorry. But motivated nonetheless. And then you have this Spiders team that outside of Atlanta has the most look of any squad so far through the first 5 weeks of play. I mean, Oakland is just connecting, right? And their defense, I think, is playing well, but could still take it up a couple of notches. The offense, again, outside of the hustle, is probably the best unit in the association right now.
Yeah, and it's prove it time for Oakland. I know they're 5-0. I know they've looked good, but their only road games so far were a 1-goal win against Seattle, where they almost gave away a 5-goal lead in the fourth, and then a dominant second half against an Oregon team that couldn't measure up. How good is this Oakland team? We will find out in the weeks ahead as they go to Colorado. They get Salt Lake at home next Friday night. They also go to Salt Lake at the end of June, and then they have 2 games against the San Diego Growlers team late June and into July. So, yeah, you're right about the look of this Oakland team. Like, it seems like every single game, a different guy is the featured guy for the offense, and that's a really scary thing to try to plan for as an opponent.
You know what it reminds me of? The Flyers when they're in their winning ways, where you just kind of pick your poison. That's how the Spiders feel right now, to your point.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point because sometimes it's Fairfax and sometimes it's Mitchell and sometimes it's Dylan Hawkins and sometimes it's Grayson Sanner or Alan Laviolette or whatever. Like, yeah, it was Adam Reese this past weekend, but it could be Evan Madstig, it could be Leo Gordon, it could obviously be Walker Frankenberg. And yeah, this Oakland team, as you said, they have the look. I think I'm interested to see how they fare on the road against a good team in front of a good crowd. But similar to Minnesota, like this game to me is even more about Colorado because they haven't necessarily had the look. Like their only 2 wins are both at home against Oregon, right?
And I'll say it right here on the pod. This past weekend, they had some trouble creating separation through the first 2.5 quarters in that rain-soaked game against the Steel. Like Oregon was punching with them early.
Yeah, there's just a sense of frustration right now with Colorado, and I mean, I was listening to Quinn Finer talk on their Pod Practice podcast this past week, and I mean, he was very introspective in kind of saying, like, I'm not playing well enough right now. And, like, I appreciate that acknowledgement. But the scarier part for Colorado is I don't know if they know the answer of how to get back to the level that we kind of expect them to be. Now, maybe it's as simple as adding Tobias Brooks, Zeke Thorson, Nonaman Fink, and Elliot Hawkins, 4 of Mama Bird's best players, into the lineup. Like maybe that will give them the jolt that they need. But both offensively and defensively, their worth has not measured up to the sum of their parts so far this season, and obviously dating back to last year. And it's go time for them. Like if they have any aspiration of hosting the West Division championship game, which I think is something that you and I thought was a realistic goal for them coming into the season, they need to win this game. They're not going to lose and this is the only regular season meeting against the Spiders. So if they fall to 2-3 and the Spiders get to 6-0, the Spiders would have to lose 4 times to give Colorado a chance to pass them in the standings, and that's assuming Colorado runs the table the rest of the way. So, like, it's go time if Colorado's going to be anything close to the team that we thought they could be.
Yeah. And I think you're describing and kind of diagnosing the same problems that we've seen for the Summit the past 2 or so years, right? Ever since they, made their championship weekend appearance in 2022, they've kind of been this team that's been a little bit out over their skis. You telescope in on any given game, you watch a given sequence, you see some of the highlights and you're like, this is one of the best teams in the entire association. How could they not be? Look at Noah Kuhlman clearing out into, the lower tier of space. Look at Alex Atkins flying around on defense. Look at Keenan Lawrence and Quinn Finer when they do get into rhythm for this Summit offensive attack. But when you watch them over a full 4 quarters, to your point, there's some sort of juice lacking. I don't know if it's, something mental, as we've kind of alluded to in the past with this Colorado team, or if it's simply that the pieces don't fit together as well on the field as we think they do on paper. But to your point,
I think it speaks to the importance. Sorry to interrupt, but I think it speaks to the importance of having really high level O-line handlers, and that's just something that this team has lacked when Jonathan Nethercutt hasn't been in the lineup.
Well,
they've been relying on Connor Olson and Danny Landisman coming back from injury, and they just don't have the dynamic presence in the backfield right now, or they haven't had that, and that's been one of their big issues.
Oh, absolutely. And I was meandering very unconcisely towards the point of this team has just kind of been in the shadow of Nethercutt and Spicer, right? I mean, they said it as much when those two were the prominent, leaders on the team, that we are so thankful to have these legends as our offensive and defensive sort of, tip of the spears. And to just sort of lose that one season and then the next, it's a big deal. I think we've really undersold what those players meant to the Summit team. Spicer was the defensive player of the year. Nethercutt was a former MVP and a throw god. He opens up the field unlike anyone else has in this association's history. He can throw it from anywhere on the field. He's as close to a Steph Curry as we have. And it's just, they're kind of trying to figure out what they have left in the abstract of that. And it's not to say that they don't have stuff. It's just, it's not the same, right? And
the guys that they're adding kind of add to what they're already good at. I mean, Tobias and Zeke and Nanda are really explosive special players, but I think of them all as downfield creators and cutters and playmakers, not they can handle a dump swing, and I wouldn't be surprised if Tobias Brooks catches some centering passes in this game on Friday night, but I think he's probably, with the Flyers, he wasn't doing that, right? Like, he was a downfield weapon, and that's probably where he's at his best.
Absolutely. I mean, he was one of the most dangerous playmakers over the last half of last year. I mean, he was the go-to point of attack for the Flyers as they made a championship game appearance in 2024. Yeah. So I kind of expect him to take that to the next level for the Summit.
Yeah. Also, after college nationals, everybody's tired. Like, I didn't play a single point, and I'm really tired. Those guys played a lot of points over the course of 4 days. They had, significant rest. But
you're too far removed from what it was to be that age. You give them 48 hours and some Chipotle, they'll be right back at it.
You're probably right. You're probably right. I am twice their age in some cases, so you're not wrong about that. And then not just the Summit and Spiders on Friday night, but you have Seattle and Salt Lake again. Rematching 1 week after the absurdity that we saw last week that we talked about on the React Pod on over the weekend. But man, so I got to tell you, I walked by on the field in Burlington, Washington, and I think it was Sunday, and there's Lucas Ambrose and there's Zeppelin Raunig just kind of hanging out watching the Oregon game. Ambrose went to Oregon, and they just kind of had these sheepish grins on their faces, like they knew that they've missed a huge opportunity. The frustration is real for Seattle, and I think they're just going to still compete hard and have fun. But there's also, I said it on the pod reacting over the weekend, it stuck with me because Brian Jones nailed it when he said, I don't think I've seen a team look more devastated after a regular season loss. And there have been some crazy games. Remember when Carolina had a 2-goal lead at New York with 30 seconds left and found a way to lose in overtime? There have been some crazy ways to lose in this league historically. But for Seattle to lose to that version of Salt Lake when they had a 6-goal lead and they kept on punching but just didn't have quite enough down the stretch, what is Seattle going to look like at home on Friday night against a Shred team that is going to be much better and much stronger and punch harder than they could have last weekend in Week 5?
Yeah, and look, Lucas Ambrose is out for this game on Friday against Shred in the rematch. So, yeah, I mean, this is truly do or die time for the 1-5 Cascades, right? Like, they've got to pull out this win, otherwise that's kind of it in this West Division playoff race. I mean, unless something truly unforeseen and chaotic happens and Oakland endures a couple of losses, and I don't know what kind of mess, really. Because, again, Oakland has now swept the season series against the Cascades, because Cascades, after losing on Friday night against the Shred, went on the road and lost against the Spiders, which we haven't even gotten to talk about on this pod yet. So, yeah, it's really unfortunate for Seattle because they continue to play some pretty good Frisbee. They can't catch breaks. Their depth isn't what it was last year. And there's just a few too many injuries and missing pieces in places that they need. Whereas last year, it felt like their rotations, for the most part, especially in their second half playoff push, were ironclad. Like, you knew what to expect kind of going into each and every point of a given game. 2025 feels like they're kind of rolling the dice at some of these, lineups that they put on the field. And that's not to place any criticism on the Seattle coaching staff or anything. It's just the hand that they're dealt right now, again, with kind of juggling some absences, having Ambrose inactive for this coming weekend. They've just kind of always been a little behind the 8 ball when it's come to matching up in 2025. And as a result, given the tightness of the margins in this league, they're 4 games under 500.
Yeah. And they're like, they could have beaten Oregon. They had a multi-goal lead, let us slip away, lose in overtime. They obviously could have won at Salt Lake. Like, they could easily be 3-3 instead of 1-5 right now. But you are who you are, and yeah, I mean, if they fall to 1-6, it feels pretty much over for them in terms of a playoff position. I mean, they're not chasing home field right now. They're chasing that opening round road game at the 2nd seed. Like, that's what the Cascades are clinging to as a possible surprise late season push. But yeah,
in their
I think
favor, though, if they get this win this Friday, there are enough teams in that division with multiple losses where it's not entirely out of the picture anymore, right? Like, that's, again, how close it is between success and failure in 2025 in the UFA, where if they can somehow get a 2-goal win against the visiting Shred, they will then own the head-to-head tiebreaker and put the Shred at 2-2 and within striking distance of overtaking them in the West Division standings. Like, it is that close and in play for the Skates as well.
And their next 2 games after this one are home for Vegas and home for LA. So if they get this win, then you project them to be 4-5 heading into back-to-back games against Colorado, who will be the team that they'll be likely competing against in that battle for the 3rd playoff spot. So, like, yeah, there is a roadmap for the Cascades, even at 1-5, but it obviously is go time for them now. And, without Lucas Ambrose, as you mentioned, it's going to be tricky. But, Ambrose has been solid, but he hasn't had the same type of spectacular start to the season that he had basically for the last 2 years in the league with LA and Seattle, respectively. So, yeah, I mean, also on Friday night, Houston at LA. Can Houston back up their win over Colorado with a road win against the Aviators? Curious to see Texas star Xavier Fuzat make his 2025 Havoc debut, and expect Madison to beat Indy at Bree Stevens Field. You're on the call that one. I'd love to shift to Saturday, Adam, because the game that I'm most looking forward to is probably not the game that you would think. Like, obviously, Atlanta-Chicago is a really awesome game, but
listen, I'm a sicko where I probably will guess the same game. Do you want to try it at the same time? On 3, 1, You
two,
can't.
3, 2, 1. Carolina,
Carolina,
Philly.
Philly. Yep. Told you I got the same sick, twisted mind as you, brother.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it is we've seen this matchup before and we've seen it be exciting, especially at
Oh, it's a
Philadelphia
great
a couple
matchup.
of
Great
years
matchup.
ago. And yeah, where do you want to start with this game?
How about just the records? How about that? 0-4 Carolina visiting 3-1 Philadelphia, as you and I had mapped out well before the season, right? Just let's put that reality front and center here. And then let's just talk about the more specifics, right? You've got this reeling Carolina team that cannot afford to go 0-5. I know we've kind of been flirting around with, oh, this Flyers team can make a run. Oh, 0-2 doesn't matter. 0-3 is kind of bad. Oh, 0-4. 0-5 they have to avoid. They just have to. And on the flip side, you got this Philly team that is a razor's edge from 4-0. Almost threw a second monkey off their back last weekend against the Empire. And I guarantee you they're going to be carrying that energy against the Flyers team that they have confidence that they can beat, right? And I think especially you look at the struggles that Carolina has defensively where they're playing pretty well. It feels like when you just watch them play defense, it's like, oh, they're pressuring throws. Oh, they're putting on good coverage. They are allowing opposing offenses the highest scoring success rate in the entire association in 2025. And Philly's offense right now is playing some pretty darn good Frisbee. And I just think it's going to be a real interesting matchup of teams kind of with opposite trending arrows, right? You've got this Flyers team on the downswing and this Philly team that still feels ascendant, even coming off of a loss. And I just wonder if we get another scenario where, it switches and Carolina, kind of comes out from under, drubs the Phoenix, and we've got to reestablish our norms once again. Where's your mind at in this matchup?
My mind is that you mentioned Carolina defensively has not measured up. And yes, they've played against some elite offenses in not that windy conditions, and even elite defenses can struggle in those moments. But I felt it at the DC game that I called. Like they just lack some punch defensively. And we've been waiting for guys like Elijah Long and Christian Belis to come back. Well, they're still out. There's still no Seth Weaver. Drew Swanson and Ethan Bloodworth are also listed as out for Friday night.
Yeah. They lost Trevor Lynch to an injury a couple weekends ago. He came back.
Yeah, no Trevor Lynch.
Now he's out again.
No William Coffin.
Yeah.
And I like the players that they have suited up in a lot of different cases. Like, I think they're good players, but those guys that we just mentioned are like elite guys making plays in championship games.
Not only that, they're part of the program and have been for many years. And you talk about the defensive side of the disc, that kind of chemistry is of utmost importance. Just understanding the system, understanding what your coverage assignment is, and how it works with your teammates. I think what the Flyers have an issue with right now is that on the D-line, they have so many new rotations, just guys who haven't really all played together as a 7-unit before, that it kind of comes off like Toronto, where they're good at their individual assignments, but as far as like constructing a generalized coverage scheme, there's just no game plan so far.
Yeah, I'm quickly going through the championship game roster from last year. Mm-hmm. And of the 20 guys that played against the Minnesota Wind Chill in the finals, more than half of them will not be on the field at Philly. So it is a very different Flyers team. And I don't know if we've, emphasized that enough. Like, yes, there are guys that were in the championship game, like Mitchell and Fairfax and Laviolette. But, guys that were in the championship game last year, that aren't on the team anymore, in Tobias Brooks and Henry Fisher and Anders Jungst and Ben Snell. But then you just have the guys that are injured. I mean, Alex Davis still hurt. Seth Weaver and Elijah Long and Christian Belis working their way back from injuries. Like, it is a very different Flyers team. So where's my mind at? I look at this as a game I think Philly should win based upon what we've watched from the Phoenix so far this year, how their offense has been pretty reliable and consistent, and frankly, their defense with Nate Little and Paul Owens kind of at the head of the snake have been playmakers, I mean, Paul Owens,
Oh
it seems
yeah.
like is averaging a hand block a week, and Nate Little is winning those 50-50 battles in the air against great receivers, and they've got other guys that are slotting in and contributing. And, Greg Martin, questionable for this game. Curious to see. But I think they played without him last game against New York. Yeah, they did. And, they didn't win, but they still played pretty well. So, yeah, I mean, it feels crazy to say, like, based upon our historical perceptions, that I expect Philly to win this game. But knowing the significance of it in the East Division race and knowing the Flyers' vulnerabilities right now, and them being on the road, I think I lean Philly. I certainly expect it to be a close game. I would not be shocked at all if Carolina goes in and wins handily, quite frankly. Like, Carolina could win this game by 5 or 6, and I wouldn't be stunned. But I think Philly deserves to be considered the favorite. They've earned that through their performance so far this season, even in their loss to New York last week.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of meant coming into the segment about their upward trending arrow. And I think you're very apt to bring up Owens and Little in particular, because I think their matchups are going to be key to watch coming up on Saturday night. In particular, Little potentially guarding Jacob Fairfax at the end of quarters, I think it could be instrumental in the outcome to this game. And just seeing who Owens matches up against, I think my eye most readily goes to Laviolette as somebody who you might put Owens on, but he could match up against Rutledge Smith, John McDonnell. Like, I'm really interested to see where the Phoenix defense kind of puts their king piece, because you're right. Owens has just been on another level in 2025. I mean, perennially one of the best handler defenders, but this year he's an absolute snake in those reset spaces. His ability to anticipate where a throw is going and simply step in front of it and interrupt it is second to none right now. And he continues to be, I think, a top 3 to 5 defensive playmaker or difference maker this year. I think absolutely a front runner for Depody so far.
I think he probably starts in either McDonnell or Smith. Probably McDonnell, as just an annoying guy that's going to be in his grill all night. And we know Owens likes to play physical. He'll probably get a foul or two called against him, but he'll probably get a block or two to his credit as well. And that's how I expect the Phoenix to try to set the tone in a really, really good game on Saturday night, starting at the same exact time as DC Montreal, and then 1 hour later you got Atlanta Chicago. Saturday is going to be a fun night, and Houston at San Diego is the late night game, 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific. Like, obviously, with what San Diego has done, I think the Growlers should win this game. But I also think, look, Houston, with what they did against Colorado and how they looked against Madison, I think deserve our attention, because I expect them to beat LA on Friday. And if they do, then they're 2-3. San Diego's 4-2. And Houston's going to start to believe a little bit, especially if they can be competitive in the first half against the Growlers. And I think this is a Houston team that is gradually showing that they have a little bit more bite than years past, a little bit more consistency. And I don't expect them to beat San Diego, but I think it'll be a little bit more difficult than the Growlers might be thinking going into it, coming off that difficult road trip in the Southeast. What do you think about that?
Nah, I've got to disagree with you here. I think for as much as I'm normally a Havoc booster and pretty optimistic about their matchup chances, this Growlers team just feels like a tough draw for them, especially coming off of a game the night before against a pretty punchy and up-tempo Aviators offense. I think LA is going to have its way for runs. I think it's going to be really interesting between Houston and LA to see who can manage the runs more. I think that could be a heavy momentum swinging game between two kind of inexperienced rosters. On Saturday night against San Diego, I just think the Growlers are going to be motivated only splitting those games against Carolina and Atlanta. I feel like they kind of feel internally that they let one get away against the Hustle. They lost end of quarter situations. They got kind of outplayed in some one-on-one scenarios that I think that Growlers team in particular takes pretty personally. And I could see them alleviating some of their stresses against a Houston team that's going to be a little fatigued and might not want to run with a Growlers attack right now that is, again, top 3 to 5 unit in the UFA. I mean, last weekend they were so impressive. Just can name, 3 to 6 guys who are absolutely performing at peak levels. And I think that they're going to continue that against a Houston defense that just won't be used to West style, offensive attacks, even though it's the new look South.
I thought I was going to have you. Thought I was going to have you put $1 into the jar
this time.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, I get what you're saying. It certainly doesn't help the Havoc that, two big disc movers, Chase Cunningham and Dalton Smith, are not active this weekend. Neither is Kyle Kalafa, downfield athlete. But I think I expect San Diego to win, but I think it'll be 5 goals or fewer, at least, until maybe late in the fourth. Maybe they'll run out of gas. But I do think the Havoc can put some scare into San Diego. Do we owe it to do a little Atlanta Chicago in the Union's perspective going into this game, or do you want to go wrap up with the Sunday games now?
No, let's give it some due on the game of the week, because I think it's absolutely deserving to talk about can Atlanta weather a tough Friday night matchup and then carry it over into Saturday against the Chicago team that's going to be looking to pick them off. I still think we're going to be looking for some of the debuts to take place for this Union team. No Sophie Bontemps yet, but Nate Goff, Paul Arders will be active in the Union lineup coming into this Saturday's game. And I just think that for the Union especially, they've got to continue to capitalize on games that we kind of thought that they were going to lose coming into the 2025 schedule. We talked extensively about Union could drop the first 2 games and then run the table, blah, blah, blah. What if the Union just pick up both these wins against Minnesota and now Atlanta and then also run the table and go for their first title in franchise history? I think that that's absolutely on the table now too. And I think the Union, apt for their sterling white kits, are looking for a little bit of perfection in 2025. And so I think that they see this undefeated Atlanta team as a perfect opportunity to sort of reassert themselves as the top dog in the UFA.
I think that's all reasonable. I was thinking about asking you earlier, 5 undefeated teams left. If Atlanta wins on Friday, we'll see 2 of the 5 teams go head-to-head on Saturday in Chicago. Which team is the most likely to finish the season undefeated? Oakland obviously is 5-0, but they got a tough game coming up Friday night at Colorado. Boston's 4-0, but they still have a lot of tough road games at the end. Of course, they finished the season with 3 straight on the road: Philly, DC, and New York. Not necessarily in that order, but those are their last 3 games all on the road. And, Atlanta has 2 tough road games this weekend. Austin 4-0. They have to go to the West Coast and play LA and San Diego next week, I believe. So, yeah, I'm with you, though, about Chicago. Not only do they add Goff and Arders, Tim Schock, fresh off leading the Carleton men to a championship as the coach. He's back in the lineup. By the way, it was interesting to have Tim Schock and Noah Hansen coaching side by side for Carleton. There's certainly some wind chill Union jibber jabber going on right there. And I know that Noah Hansen is eager to get one back at Chicago on July 4th, the Friday Night Frisbee showcase that I'm definitely looking forward to on Independence Day, which is just over a month away. Yeah, you look at the roster that Chicago has, and you're like, damn, this is a strong unit. And it's also going to be interesting to see how the Hustle look without Brett Holzmeyer, because he is not expected to play on Saturday. There's a World Games training weekend. He's an alternate for the World Games squad. So he's going to my understanding, he's playing Friday night, but then he's going to take off to Colorado either late Friday night or first thing Saturday morning to be a part of Team USA's practice weekend. So Obviously, we talked before, the Hustle have plenty of weapons, but Holzmeyer, in a lot of ways, is like the release valve just because he's so big and so threatening downfield that he can almost always catch it in the backfield whenever he wants. He can almost always make catches contested downfield to bail the Hustle out as well. So, like, can Alec Wilson Holiday step up a little bit as a downfield playmaker? Obviously, he had a great first quarter against San Diego. I love that reel that you put together. I assume it was you about his first quarter acumen against the Growlers, and he had some awesome celebrations. And his just energy is a vibe right now. Like maybe this is his true breakout game without Holzmeyer. Maybe this is Cameron Brock's kind of breakout game with the Hustle without Holzmeyer. And obviously, Brock has a lot of experience playing against Chicago and knows them well.
I think it's an Austin Taylor breakout game, to be quite honest. I think that
he's not already broken out.
I mean, he has, but again, with Holzmeyer's absence, I think it's an absolute time for him to assert himself as the main motivating piece of this Hustle offense from antiquity. I mean, he's been there since year one. He's been the QB1 of this team for the better part of a decade at this point, and I just think that against an opponent the caliber of the Union, it could be a real chance for him to have another showcase game and set his mark. Because if you remember, he's had some pretty sterling primetime performances in the past. That first half against New York in the playoffs, 2021, I mean, he was on fire. Like, he could come out just absolutely ripping it against this Union team and maybe setting the tone a bit against one of the league's best defenses.
Yeah. No, there's no doubt about it. And yeah, I mean, amongst all the other good games, there's a reason this is the game of the week. It's a matchup we've never seen before. It's a potential championship game preview. I mean, I know in my promo for the Atlanta-Minnesota game, I said, it's a potential championship weekend preview. But this game as well, especially, it's just one data point, but with what Chicago did at Minnesota, not even their full-strength squad, like the Union have 11 games to find the best version of themselves to get ready for the playoffs. And the question for the Union, it's been the question all year, can they peak at the right time? Can they maximize their potential? Can they put all of their pieces in the right spots to look like a true championship contender? And, we're just 3 years removed from Chicago really giving the undefeated New York Empire a really tough test in that 2022 championship game at Breese-Stevens Field. Championship weekend is back at Breese-Stevens Field this year. And it would not be a shock at all right now to have Chicago in that game once again. And it could very well be against Atlanta.
And this Atlanta offense feels like the best offense since those historic Empire units. Like, that's kind of the level that they're playing at. So to your point, if Chicago can kind of reach back and sort of reharness that championship energy once again, it would be a terrific show if they could knock off the undefeated Hustle.
That's a really interesting point, and one we should get into another time about does this Hustle offense, compare to those 2022, 2023 New York squads. I don't know.
Very quickly, I think it lacks some of the absolute star power that those New York squads had, but I think in terms of its versatility and balance, is starting to approach that level because you just cannot really pick on a weak link in the Hustle attack. And they can kind of weaponize anyone into a thrower or a receiving threat.
Yeah. And I mean, as I wrote, they are on pace to have the fewest turnovers per game in a season in the history of the league. So it's a really interesting conversation. I want to think about it some more. I'm not sure if that's an insult to the Hustle or an insult to the Empire, or if it's an apt comparison. So I need to let that one ruminate.
I'll still take the Empire again because you're talking about a unit that featured prime Jack Williams, Jeff Babbitt, Ryan Osgar, and Ben Yacht. So it's hard to take anyone over that quartet, but I think Atlanta's starting to sneak into the conversation, is all I'm saying.
Halsmeyer, Taylor, Austin, Nab, and Miller. That's a really good quartet too.
I know. It's got a lot of size, a lot of versatility. And what I really like as a comparison, too, is that both teams still attack downfield. They still love to stretch defenses with the huck. They still have some of the best downfield throwers. It's not just kind of the conservative look that I think some of these hyper efficient offensive play with, you talk about like Boston. They're not a very interesting team to watch on the offensive side of the disc all the time. Not so much the case with this Atlanta squad.
Yeah. Adam, I got like 5-6 minutes before I got to run. Let's quickly talk about New York, Toronto on Sunday, and Carolina, Pittsburgh.
Let's rush it.
2 p.m. for the Empire and the Rush in Toronto. 4 p.m. for the Flyers and Thunderbirds. So that's a nice little Sunday afternoon doubleheader on WatchUFA.tv. What do you think? I mean, first and only game of the weekend for the Empire, whereas the Rush have the Friday game, but they have Saturday off and they're not traveling. So we'll see this matchup on Friday Night Frisbee in mid-late June. Again, it feels like kind of a now or never game for Toronto. I mean, even independent of the DC result, they obviously need to get at least one of these wins. If they get both of them at home, then they're right back in the mix.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a really interesting matchup because it's the two teams that own basically every single East Division championship in that division's long-standing history. And yet here they are kind of sitting at a combined 3-6 and a little bit on the outside of the playoff picture in their own division. And so I think it's time for two of the league's most winning franchises to maybe reestablish themselves, and for New York to kind of gut out from their 2-3 hole and finally get back over 500 at the win against the Rush this weekend. Or on the flip side for Toronto, maybe they win on Friday night and then they can pick up this win, and then they're at 2-3. New York's at 3-4. And kind of as we were talking about the West Division standings before, this East Division just looks absolutely razor thin everywhere and all over. I don't know. I could go either way in this matchup. I think, again, it comes down to, can Toronto's defense provide any sort of resistance against the New York attack? And on the flip side, can the Empire defense show up as they did in Philadelphia last Friday night? I think that was the best the New York D-line has played in 2025, and I think they need to continue that momentum going forward because that was the real backbone of their championship teams, and it's just not been at the same level in 2025.
Yeah, well, with the World Games practice weekend impacting Brett Holzmeyer in Atlanta, Marquez Brownlee, who is on the USA World Games team as well, he is out on Sunday for the game at Toronto. That is a significant loss for the New York D-line. Jack Williams is also currently listed as questionable. We saw him play at Philly this past Friday night, coming back from the hamstring injury that he tweaked in the practice right before the Boston-Montreal games that he did not play. And look, Jack had 39 completions, only 1 assist, no goals, a solid game, but not the, dominant Jack Williams game. If the Empire are without Jack and Marquez, I think I definitely lean Toronto in this game. With Jack, it feels like a toss-up. And yeah, again, I think this is going to be a fun game. I'm excited to see Ethan Lehman on the field for New York. I know from talking to Anthony Nunez before the season, he was very excited to get him in an Empire jersey. If you're not familiar, just finished his sophomore year at UMass. He's not a big guy, but there's some similarities between the Grossbergs and Ethan. Just like really, really skilled, really quick, really smart, and good Frisbee instincts. Now, I don't want to just compare him to the Grossbergs because playing in your first UFA game when you've never played with a team before in a place like Toronto, it's not an easy thing to do. But I do think that Lehman is going to be a guy that the New York D-line most likely will lean on unless they slot him in on the offense as a downfield cutter, because he also could fill a role there. He's a versatile guy. So excited to see how he fits into the Empire. And then on, Sunday afternoon, later in the day, game 2 of the Flyers weekend. Do you hold out any hope for Pittsburgh after they fell behind 15-2 at home, or is this Carolina's game to take, just like Minnesota took it against Pittsburgh and Madison took it against Pittsburgh the week before that?
Pittsburgh has had a real tough reversal after their first 2 games compared to their last 2. They were really coasting on offense. They had like a roughly 75% success rate through their first 2 wins of the season. Then they ran smack dab into Madison and Minnesota's D-line coverages and kind of have fallen apart over their last 2 games. And so I think, again, against the Carolina defense that has struggled to contain opposing offenses, it could be an opportunity for the T-Birds to get back on track, but I don't necessarily anticipate that. I think the Thunderbirds have a lot to work through right now. I think that they're just a very young team and still looking to kind of establish themselves, and they just need to get out of this funk of allowing opponents to go on these unmitigated break trains where opposing defenses just run roughshod over the Pittsburgh offense. There's virtually no coverage provided after a turn, so maybe they could do that against the Flyers. I don't anticipate it. I think Carolina might pick up 2 wins this weekend and get back into the South Division playoff picture.
You're calling a Carolina win at Philly on Friday or on Saturday?
I think Philly is favored, but I don't know. I guess it's old habits die hard. I feel like Philly's luck just gets weird when schedules get thick at this point in the season. And so I kind of figure the Flyers will reverse their winless trend. But I think, to your point earlier, I favor Philly. It's just something in my gut. Something in my gut is telling me Carolina is going to get 2 wins this weekend.
We'll see. It's going to be a juicy weekend. 13 games, right?
13 games. We got the Friday night Frisbee feature between Atlanta and Minnesota, and then the game of the week on Saturday night between Atlanta and Chicago. Those games will be on UFA YouTube and Watch UFA TV, respectively. You can tune in and find all of the games live on Watch UFA TV. That'll do it for Evan and I here on Swing Pass. We might be back to join you for a rapid reaction depending on how all the action tilts out this weekend. I know, Evan, you're coming off of a Herculean effort this past couple of days over the holiday weekend with both our slate of games as well as the college nationals. So might be trying to give you a little bit of rest and respite, but no rest for the wicked. Am I right?
We will see. If there's craziness, I'll be there for you. You know I will.
All right. I knew it. We're both sick in the head for this stuff. And if you're listening to this point in the pod, you probably are too, but we'll talk to you soon. That'll do it for us now. Bye.